I want to start by saying that I almost did not write this. Not because I'm worried about people believing me, but because writing it means reliving it in a level of detail that my brain has spent the last 10 months trying to protect me from. My doctor actually suggested I try to get it out in writing as part of working through what happened. 10 months ago, I was living alone in a small rental house on Candler Road on the east side of Decatur. It was a quiet, older neighborhood, mostly families and retirees, the kind of street where people put out their trash cans on Tuesday night and wave at each other from their lawns on Saturday morning. I had lived there for almost 2 years without a single problem. No break-ins on the street, no sketchy activity, nothing that ever made me feel unsafe. I was comfortable there. I had let my guard down completely, and I say that now because I think about it all the time. I had gotten too comfortable. It was a Thursday night in late January. I had been out with my coworker Jade for dinner and drinks at a place called Understory over in Ponce City Market. Nothing crazy, just 2 glasses of wine and some food. I was completely sober when I got home. I pulled into my driveway at around 11:30 at night and sat in my car for a minute finishing a voice message I was sending to my sister back in Alabama. Normal, routine, completely unremarkable end to a normal Thursday. I got out of my car, and that is where normal ended. I had taken maybe 4 steps toward my front door when I heard movement behind me. Not footsteps exactly, more like the sudden shift of weight on gravel. The sound of something that had been completely still, suddenly deciding to move. I started to turn around, and that is when he hit me. I want to be honest that the next few seconds are fragmented in my memory, the way things get when your brain is overwhelmed faster than it can process. What I know is that something slammed into me from behind, with enough force to drive me off my feet and into the side of my own car. My face hit the driver's side window, and I felt the impact in my teeth, and my vision went white for a split second. I bounced off the car and went down onto the driveway on my hands and knees, and the pain in my palms from the concrete was so sharp and immediate that it actually snapped me back into full consciousness faster than anything else could have. I scrambled to get up, and he grabbed me by the back of my jacket. I screamed, as loud as I have ever screamed in my entire life. Not a scared scream, not a help me scream. A raw animal scream that came from somewhere I didn't even know existed inside me. The kind of sound your body makes when it has decided that survival is the only thing that matters, and it is willing to do absolutely anything to achieve it. I twisted inside my jacket and slipped one arm out of the sleeve and spun around, and for the first time I saw him. He was big, not just tall but wide, with heavy shoulders and thick arms, and he was wearing dark clothing and something over his face. Not a mask exactly, more like a dark fabric wrap covering everything below his eyes. His eyes above that wrap were pale, and they were locked onto me with a focus and intensity that made my blood go cold in a way that the physical attack itself hadn't quite managed. There was nothing frantic or out of control about him. He was calm, methodical, like he had done this before and knew exactly how it was going to go. That calm is what scared me more than anything else. More than his size, more than the attack itself. The absolute terrifying calm of someone who is not afraid of being caught. He grabbed for me again, and I threw myself backward away from him and hit the hood of my car and used it to push myself sideways toward the front of the driveway. I was screaming the entire time, screaming for help, screaming my neighbor's name, screaming anything that might bring another human being outside. My neighborhood was quiet, but the houses were close together, and I knew sound carried, and I was producing as much of it as my lungs would allow. He caught me at the edge of the driveway. His hand closed around my wrist, and he yanked me back toward him so hard, my shoulder felt like it was going to separate, and I went into him and he got both arms around me from behind in this crushing grip, and I could not breathe properly, could not get enough air, and I was kicking and throwing my head back, trying to connect with his face, and none of it was doing enough. He was just too strong and too controlled, and I felt my legs starting to give out underneath me, not from exhaustion, but from pure overwhelming fear. And then the porch light at my neighbor's house slammed on. The front door opened and my neighbor, an older man named Douglas Petty, who I guessed was in his early 70s, came out onto his porch in his bathrobe, holding a shotgun. Douglas was a retired Georgia State Trooper, and I had known that about him since I moved in. But I had never in my life been so profoundly grateful for that specific piece of information as I was in that exact moment. Douglas did not hesitate for even a single second. He racked that shotgun on his porch at 11:30 at night, and in the quiet of that Decatur neighborhood, that sound was absolutely enormous. It cracked through the air like a physical thing, and I felt the man holding me go completely rigid for one single second. And that 1 second was all I needed. I drove my elbow back into him as hard as I could, and twisted and broke free, and ran straight toward Douglas's porch screaming, and Douglas had already come down his front steps and was moving toward the driveway with that shotgun up. The man in my driveway ran, not away down the street, not back through my yard the way he had come. He ran to the left along the side of my house and disappeared into the dark, narrow gap between my house and the fence line, and was gone in about 4 seconds. Douglas kept the shotgun up and watched that gap for a long moment, and then he put his arm around me and walked me inside his house, and his wife Carolyn was already on the phone with 911. I sat at Douglas and Carolyn's kitchen table, shaking so hard the coffee cup they gave me was rattling against the saucer, and I could not make it stop. My wrist had deep bruising already forming where he had grabbed me, and my shoulder ached badly enough that I was worried something was actually torn in there. My palms were scraped raw from the driveway, and there was a small cut on my cheekbone from where my face had connected with the car window. The police arrived in about 6 minutes. 3 units, which felt both reassuring and somehow insufficient given what had just happened. They searched the area on foot with flashlights and a canine unit that arrived about 15 minutes later. The dog tracked a scent along the side of my house, through a gap in the back fence, across the yard of the property behind mine, and then lost it on the street on the other side of that block, where the scent just stopped, like he had gotten into a vehicle, like someone had been waiting for him. That detail that someone might have been waiting for him is the one that has never stopped haunting me, because that means it was planned. That means someone chose my house, chose my driveway, chose me specifically, or chose that location specifically, and had an exit strategy ready before any of it even started. The police investigated, and I gave them everything I could. His size, his build, the fabric wrap over his face, the pale eyes, all of it. They canvassed the neighborhood and interviewed residents and reviewed what little security camera footage existed in the area. They developed no suspects. The case is technically still open as far as I know, but I have not received a meaningful update in months. Douglas Petty came over the next morning to check on me, and we sat on my porch and talked for a long time. I thanked him in a way that felt completely inadequate for what he had actually done, and he waved it off the way that generation of men tends to do. He told me he had heard my first scream from inside his house with the TV on and was out the door in under a minute. He said he had heard a lot of things in his years on the force, but something about that scream told him immediately that it was not something he could wait on. I moved out of that house on Candler Road exactly 3 weeks after it happened. I am living now in a low apartment complex in Avondale Estates with a secured entrance and a camera on every corner of the building and a deadbolt and a chain on my door that I check no less than 3 times before I get into bed every night. I still have not fully processed what would have happened if Douglas Petty had not heard me scream, if he had been asleep, if the TV had been louder, if he had been the kind of person who decides to let it be someone else's problem and stays inside. I try not to go too far down that road because there is nothing at the end of it that helps me in any way. What I know is this: something was very wrong with the man in my driveway that night. Not wrong like mentally ill, or wrong like desperate. Wrong in a deeper way that I felt in my gut, and still feel when I think about it now. The calmness, the method, the patience of it. The pale eyes above that dark wrap that looked at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person. I sleep with the light on now. I know that sounds like a small and almost embarrassing admission, but I don't care anymore. After what I saw in my driveway that January night, a little wasted electricity is a trade I am more than willing to make. Some things you just do not get over. You just learn to carry them differently, and you make sure you always know your neighbor's name. I'm 32 years old, and I run a small landscaping business with my buddy from college. I'm writing this on behalf of both me and my girlfriend Paige because she was there for every single second of what happened. We had been dating for about 2 years when this happened. Last summer, mid-July, one of those thick, humid North Carolina nights where the air feels like a warm, wet blanket, and even after the sun goes down, the heat just sits on everything and refuses to leave. Paige had suggested a couple weeks earlier that we do a long weekend trip somewhere neither of us had been before. She found this little cabin rental outside a town called Hot Springs, which is about 40 minutes northwest of Asheville, up in the mountains along the French Broad River. It looked perfect online, secluded, surrounded by national forest, a small creek running behind the property, a fire pit out front, and absolutely no neighbors visible in any direction. Private, peaceful, and exactly what we both needed after a brutally busy stretch of work for both of us. We drove up on a Friday afternoon and got there around 5. The cabin was even better in person than the photos had made it look. Small but solid, wood interior, a decent kitchen, a comfortable bed, and a covered porch, facing out into the trees where you could sit and hear nothing but the creek and the birds. Paige fell in love with it immediately, and I was pretty sold myself. We unpacked, got the fire going outside, cooked some food, and just sat on that porch watching the light fade out of the sky through the trees until the stars came out and the forest went completely dark around us. It was genuinely one of the nicest evenings we had spent together in a long time. We went inside around 11, got cleaned up, and went to bed. The cabin had no air conditioning, which the listing had mentioned, but the elevation kept it cool enough at night that it wasn't a problem. We had the bedroom window cracked and the sound of the creek coming through it, and Paige was asleep within about 10 minutes. I lay there a little longer just unwinding, and then I was out too. I woke up at 2:40 in the morning. No particular sound woke me that I could identify. I just came awake suddenly, the way you sometimes do in an unfamiliar place, where some part of your brain never fully switches off because it doesn't recognize the environment yet. I lay there for a moment, orienting myself, and then I heard it, a sound from outside, from the direction of the tree line beyond the fire pit. It was a rhythmic sound, low and repetitive, almost like a knocking, but not quite, more organic than that, like wood being struck against wood, in a slow, deliberate pattern. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks, a pause, over and over, steady as a metronome coming from somewhere in the dark trees, maybe 50 or 60 feet from the cabin. I lay there and listened to it for a full minute without moving. Paige stirred next to me, and I put my hand on her arm, and she came awake immediately and looked at me in the dark, and I put my finger to my lips. She heard it within about 3 seconds because her eyes went wide, and she grabbed my arm with both hands. We lay there together, listening to that slow, rhythmic knocking coming from the forest at 2:40 in the morning, and neither one of us said a word. It stopped. Complete silence, except for the creek. Paige whispered in my ear asking me what that was, and I told her honestly that I had no idea. We lay there in the silence for another couple of minutes, and I had almost convinced myself it was done when it started again. Same pattern, same rhythm, same direction. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, like something out there was trying to communicate something, or signal something, or simply wanted us to know it was there. I got out of bed, Paige grabbed my wrist hard and told me in a fierce whisper not to go outside, and I told her I wasn't going outside, I was just going to look. I went to the bedroom window and looked out into the dark toward the tree line. The fire had burned down to almost nothing, and there was no moon that night, so the darkness beyond the cabin was about as complete as darkness gets. I could not see anything moving in the tree line, just black shapes of trees against a slightly less black sky. The knocking stopped again. I stood at that window for a few minutes, and then went to the front door and checked that it was locked, which it was. I checked the back door too, both locked. I went back to the bedroom and told Paige it was probably an animal doing something animals do in the forest at night, and we should try to go back to sleep. She looked at me like she knew I didn't fully believe what I was saying, but she didn't argue, because I think she wanted to believe it as much as I did. We got back into bed and lay there in the dark and silence for about 20 minutes without sleeping. Then something hit the side of the cabin. Not a knock, not a rhythmic signal, a full impact against the exterior wall on the left side of the cabin, the side facing deeper into the forest, like something had thrown itself against the wood siding with real force. The whole cabin shuddered with it, and Paige screamed, and I was out of bed before I even knew I was moving. It happened again, another heavy impact against the same wall, and then again, 3 hard strikes in quick succession that shook the pictures on the interior walls and sent something small off a shelf in the kitchen that we heard hit the floor from the bedroom. Then silence. Paige was off the bed and pressed into the corner between the wall and the wardrobe, and I was standing in the middle of the bedroom with my heart hammering so loud I could feel it in my jaw. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and turned the flashlight on and held it up like that was somehow going to help me. We stood there in that bedroom for what felt like a very long time without hearing anything else. Then we heard footsteps on the porch, slow and heavy on the wooden boards of the covered porch right outside the front door. One step, then another, moving across the porch from left to right at a pace that was unhurried and deliberate in a way that made it somehow worse than if it had been running. Whatever was on that porch was not startled or frantic. It was just walking, slowly and heavily, across our porch in the middle of the night, like it had every right to be there. I pulled up the rental contact in my phone and called the number with shaking hands. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and I left a message that I am honestly not sure made any coherent sense. Then I called 911 and told them we were at a cabin rental outside Hot Springs in Madison County, and there was something outside our cabin that had been striking the walls and was now on our porch, and I needed someone out there. The dispatcher told me a Madison County Sheriff's unit would be on the way, but that our location was remote, and response time could be up to 25 minutes. 25 minutes felt like a life sentence in that moment. The footsteps on the porch stopped. We heard nothing else for the rest of the time we waited. No more knocking from the trees, no more impacts on the wall, no more footsteps on the porch boards. Just the creak in the night, and the 2 of us sitting on the bedroom floor, with our backs against the bed and every light in the cabin blazing, because I had gone through and hit every single switch while Paige watched the front door. The deputy arrived in 22 minutes. His name was Officer Brent Cawley, and he was calm and thorough and walked the entire perimeter of the cabin with his flashlight while we watched from the doorway. He found scrape marks on the exterior siding on the left wall. Long, deep scrapes in the wood at about shoulder height. 3 of them, running parallel, like something had dragged itself along the wall with enough force to gouge the wood. He stood looking at those scrape marks for a long time without saying anything. When he came back to the door, I asked him what he thought made them. He looked at me and then at Paige, and then back at the scrape marks, and said he wasn't sure, but that we were welcome to follow him back down to Hot Springs and find somewhere else to stay for the night if we felt more comfortable doing that. We did not even go back inside to pack properly. We grabbed our keys, our phones, and our shoes, and we followed Deputy Cawley's headlights down that mountain road in the dark, without looking back once. Paige has never suggested a cabin trip since that night. Neither have I. We have talked about what made those scrape marks, what was knocking in the trees, what was walking on our porch. We have come up with theories and dismissed every single one of them for one reason or another. Deputy Cawley filed a report that night. Under the section marked Nature of Incident, he wrote Unknown Disturbance, Possible Large Animal Activity. Paige and I have never once believed it was an animal, and I don't think Deputy Cawley believed it either. My name is Cody Harlan, and I'm from Burlington, Vermont. I'm 31 years old. I work as a shift supervisor at a printing facility just outside the city. And I want to make something very clear before I get into any of this. I am not someone who dramatizes things. I am not someone who exaggerates for attention or stretches a story to make it sound more interesting than it actually is. The people in my life who know me well will tell you that if anything, I tend to underreact to things rather than overreact. This was 18 months ago in late November. Vermont in late November is its own specific kind of brutal. The days are short, the nights are long, and by 4 in the afternoon, the sky is already the color of a bruise, and the temperature is dropping fast. The roads get icy early, and the woods around Burlington get dark in a way that feels almost aggressive, like the darkness is something physical that pushes back against you. I grew up in Vermont, so none of that ever really bothered me. The cold and the dark were just part of life up here, and I had made my peace with both of them a long time ago. I had just finished a double shift at the printing facility, and was driving home on Route 2 heading east toward my house in a small community called Middlesex, about 15 miles outside Burlington. It was just past midnight, and the road was empty in both directions as far as I could see. No other headlights, no businesses open, just dark frozen Vermont highway, cutting through thick bare winter forest on both sides. My heat was cranked all the way up, and I had the radio on low, and I was running on fumes after 16 hours on my feet. but I was almost home, and that was all I was focused on. About 4 miles outside of Middlesex, I passed a road I had driven past probably 1,000 times in my life. It's a narrow, unmarked road that cuts off to the left from Route 2 and goes back into the woods. I always assumed it was some kind of old logging road or private property access. It had no signage, no mailboxes, nothing to indicate what it led to. I had never once in my life seen a car turn onto it or come off of it. It was just always there, this dark, narrow gap in the tree line that I had driven past so many times it had become invisible to me the way familiar things do. That night there was a light coming from somewhere down that road, not a house light or a porch light, more like a flashlight or a lantern, something handheld, moving slowly through the trees maybe 100 yards back from the road. I noticed it because it was the only light source in any direction other than my own headlights, and it caught my eye immediately. I slowed down as I passed and looked down that dark, narrow road into the trees and watched that light moving slowly and steadily through the woods at midnight in late November in temperatures that were sitting right around 18 degrees. I kept driving, but I only made it about another half mile before I pulled over on the shoulder and sat there with my truck idling. Something about that light was not letting me go. I kept thinking about what kind of person would be out in those woods at midnight in 18-degree weather with nothing but a handheld light. A hunter maybe, except hunting at midnight in late November on foot with a flashlight made no sense. Someone who was lost, maybe, someone who needed help. I sat there arguing with myself for about 2 minutes, and then I turned around. I drove back to that unmarked road and pulled onto it slowly, my headlights cutting into the darkness between the trees. The road was dirt, frozen solid, and narrow enough that the bare branches on either side were almost brushing my mirrors. I drove maybe 50 yards down it and stopped and rolled my window down and listened. Silence. Complete and total silence except for the sound of my engine and the wind moving through the bare branches overhead. No light visible from where I was sitting. Whatever I had seen from Route 2 was either deeper in the woods than I had estimated, or it had stopped moving. I sat there for a moment, and then I did something that I have replayed in my head approximately 10,000 times since, and still cannot decide whether it was brave or catastrophically stupid. I turned my engine off. I don't know why exactly. Some instinct that told me the engine noise was masking something I needed to hear. In the sudden silence, the cold came through the open window immediately, and I could see my breath clouding in the air in front of me. And then I heard it. Footsteps on the frozen dirt road, coming from somewhere ahead of me in the darkness beyond my headlights. Slow and steady footsteps on frozen ground. A specific crunch of boots on hard frozen dirt that is completely unmistakable once you've heard it. Coming toward my truck from the darkness ahead. I reached for my key to start the engine. The footsteps stopped. I froze with my hand on the key and listened. Nothing. Whoever or whatever was walking on that road had stopped moving the moment I reached for my key. I sat completely still for 10 seconds, and then 20, and then 30, and the silence was so complete and so heavy that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Then the footsteps started again, closer now, definitely closer than they had been 30 seconds ago. I turned the key and started the engine, and the footsteps stopped again immediately. Same thing as before. The moment my engine came to life, the footsteps cut off like a switch had been flipped. I threw my truck into reverse and started backing out of that road as fast as I could manage, without going into the ditch on either side. My reverse lights lit up the narrow road behind me, and I watched my mirrors and kept backing up until I felt my rear tires hit the pavement of Route 2. I pulled out onto the highway and drove home. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I did not look in my rearview mirror more than I absolutely had to. I got inside my house and locked the door and stood in my kitchen for a few minutes, just breathing. The next morning I told my neighbor about it. His name is Walter Briggs, and he is in his mid-60s and has lived in Middlesex his entire life. Walter knows every road, every property, every piece of history in that area, going back decades. I described the location of that unmarked road and what I had seen and heard the night before. And Walter got very quiet, in a way that was not like him at all, because Walter is one of those people who always has something to say about everything. He finally told me that road had been there since at least the 1960s, He said it used to lead back to a small property where a family had lived a long time ago. He couldn't remember the family name, but he remembered his own father talking about them when he was young. He said the family had left suddenly sometime in the early 1970s, and nobody in the area had ever really known why. The property back there had been sitting empty and abandoned for over 50 years. I asked him if anyone ever went back there. He looked at me over his coffee mug and said, "Not anyone from around here." He said it in a way that made it clear he didn't want to elaborate, and I didn't push him on it. That afternoon, I drove back to Route 2 and pulled up to the entrance of that unmarked road in broad daylight and looked down it. In the daylight, I could see maybe 200 yards down the road before it curved and disappeared into the trees. The frozen dirt surface of the road was clearly visible from where I was sitting, and there were no footprints on it. Let me be precise about this because I want you to understand exactly what I am telling you. The road surface was frozen dirt covered in a thin layer of frost that had not melted, even in the afternoon. It was the kind of surface that would hold an impression perfectly. There were tire tracks from where I had driven down it the night before, my tread pattern pressed clearly into the frost, visible the entire length of the road as far as I could see. But there were no footprints anywhere on that road, except my own boot prints, from where I had briefly stepped out of my truck the night before to listen. Whatever had been walking toward me in the dark on that frozen road had left no trace on a surface that should have recorded every single step. I have driven past that road many times since that November night, because it sits on my route home, and I don't have a reasonable alternative. Every single time I pass it, I keep my eyes on the road ahead, and I do not look down it. Not during the day, and absolutely not at night. But about 3 months after it happened, I was coming home late from a friend's place. It was just past 1 in the morning, and as I passed that unmarked road, I broke my own rule without meaning to, and glanced down it. The light was there again, moving slowly through the trees in the darkness. The same handheld glow, moving at the same steady, unhurried pace deeper into the woods. I looked at it for the 2 seconds it took me to drive past, and then I put my eyes back on Route 2, and I drove home, and I did not turn around. I have never turned around again. I want to be clear that I have no explanation for any of what I experienced on that road. I've thought about every rational possibility. A person out there legitimately, some kind of animal carrying something reflective, a trick of light from somewhere else entirely. None of those explanations hold up against the full weight of everything that happened that night. The footsteps that stopped every time I made a sound, the frozen road surface with no prints, the light that came back months later, moving in exactly the same way through exactly the same stretch of trees. Walter Briggs passed away about 8 months ago. Heart attack, very sudden. He was the only person I knew who had any history about that road and that property and the family that used to live back there. Whatever he knew about it, he took with him, and I have not been able to find any records about the property or who it belonged to, no matter how hard I have looked. So I am left with what I have. A dark, unmarked road off Route 2 in Middlesex, Vermont. A light moving through frozen woods at midnight. Footsteps on a frozen road that left no prints. And the absolute certainty that whatever was walking toward my truck in the dark that November night was not something I want to ever encounter again. Some nights I lie in bed and think about what would have happened if I hadn't started my engine when I did, if I had just sat there in the silence and let those footsteps keep coming until whatever was making them reached the front of my truck and stepped into the light. I think about that more than I should, and every single time I am very glad I turned that key.